With a common theory being that the Nintendo Switch 2 could incorporate a cursor mode and operate like a mouse, let's take some time to think about how Nintendo would utilize such a feature in games. Firstly, I have to say that this is a concept that I absolutely love. Especially with all the talk about handheld PCs, it seems particularly amusing that Nintendo would make such a bold sweep into the PC gaming territory by thieving one of their primary play mechanics. And it is so Nintendo. Innovative uses of seasoned technology and new control mechanics are both central considerations for Nintendo, and we have talked before about incorporating tech from the good old-fashioned computer mouse into controllers, but usually in the sense of a scroll wheel, as previously requested by Masahiro Sakurai. However, a mouse functionality just makes incredible sense, so much that it would be frankly disappointing now if the Joy-Con don't, in fact, have a cursor mode. This also, as a couple of commenters on my previous videos have spotted, would make sense of the C button as a way to potentially activate this mode, although I'm not necessarily sure if it would require a bespoke button necessarily to activate, depending on how the games are configured. But look, if you're anything like me, you probably need a bit of a lowdown on how exactly computer mice operate. So let's start with a quick look at Wikipedia, who say, modern surface-independent optical mice work by using an optoelectronic sensor, essentially a tiny, low-resolution video camera, to take successive images of the surface on which the mouse operates. As computing power grew cheaper, it became possible to embed more powerful special-purpose image processing chips in the mouse itself. This advance enabled the mouse to detect relative motion on a wide variety of surfaces, translating the movement of the mouse into the movement of the cursor and eliminating the need for a special mousepad. Later versions of mice used infrared lasers, essentially an IR camera. In this sense, it appears that Nintendo isn't so much as adding a new piece of technology as relocating a piece of technology in such a fashion that it opens up, as they would say, a whole new way to play. There have, it seems, been innovations in mouse technology since. Logitech in 2009 introduced a mouse with 2 lasers, which was better for tracking on glass and glossy surfaces. And while there are clearly 2 sensors on the alleged leak photo, I suspect Nintendo would rather sell people branded mouse mats, which would also solve another problem that I will get to in a second. Of course, while the technology of an optical mouse uses low-resolution cameras, that's not necessarily ruling out a more high-quality camera being embedded into the hardware. Optics for Hire estimates that a camera lens could be manufactured for as low as 20 cents per unit, and these tiny optical lenses could surely be used to take in slightly higher resolutions without significantly impacting Nintendo's margins. I'm not expecting to be able to do 4K streaming by gazing into the Joy-Con, but I wouldn't rule out the optical sensor being able to take in color and perhaps to take in simple images. Remember, with AI upscaling, it's plausible that the camera could take 240p images, but upscale them to 720. I'm not saying it would look amazing, but I think for all practical purposes that Nintendo would require, it would still seem quite impressive. Now, there are risks. For one thing, using a mouse has the potential to lead to carpal tunnel syndrome, as a couple of people in the comments have pointed out. Still, if people are using a Switch mouse long enough to risk developing the syndrome, I suspect there are other problems afoot, and it's possible that if a lot of games utilize the facility, Nintendo might even decide to develop a Pro mouse, which I'm sure they would be happy to sell, given that I'm sure it would have an absolutely colossal markup in terms of the profit they'd be making. There's also the issue that tech is already available cheaply, but from Nintendo's point of view, repurposing cheap tech to sell for a higher price is very much their approach, so I don't think they'll mind that at all. And actually, I think a Joy-Con mouse would be a very different experience from a regular mouse because of the use of rumble features. There have been attempts to do rumble mice before, but generally speaking, these don't appear to have been great successes. Logitech's, I feel, being one example. The problem appears to be that when you have rumble on a flat surface, it creates an unpleasant noise. All the more reason, therefore, for Nintendo to sell their own mouse mats. Mouse mats are a perfect Nintendo product, easily brandable, dirt cheap to manufacture, but capable of being sold at a huge markup. If this is the case, I think it very likely we will see at least one branded mouse mat within the year, and I expect dozens could soon be coming down the chute. However, I think Nintendo could well discover some very precise uses for the combination of a cursor and rumble, as we'll get into. Imagine in a game like Another Code, running your hand over a wall and having the rumble change to indicate the precise place where there is a machine hidden in the wall, for example. The name of the game here is immersion. Having a mouse option would also be good for tabletop play. It would be far more comfortable in closer proximity to use a cursor than pointing at the screen. But the main benefit of a cursor is that it offers a much greater degree of control to the player, and I think this is where the system could offer much more bespoke gameplay experiences. Third parties, of course, would be particularly pleased with titles like Cities Skyline, Football Manager and the like, now capable of being played on the Switch in a manner far closer to the PC versions, which are, in many respects, still the definitive editions. It would also make porting those games over that much more simple, which can only be a good thing for everybody. But ultimately, Nintendo's interest is in their own first-party games, and so I think if there's a new control system, it is very likely that at least one first-party game will model the use of it within the first year, and moderately likely that 3 or more will. After all, while 1-2-Switch did use the IR cameras, albeit for a single minigame, Nintendo did come back to utilising these for Labo, Game Builder Garage, Ring Fit Adventure, and Brain Training. A cursor mode seems, if anything, even more potentially useful. So let's look through some of the franchises that, if the new system does indeed have cursor control, are likely to utilise those controls effectively. First, let's talk adventure games. I've already mentioned Another Code, a series with an interesting history of using the bespoke technology of the systems on which they launched to add immersive gameplay experiences. We don't know how good the sales for 2024's Another Code Recollection were, and they were certainly under the threshold of 1 million sold that triggers a mention in Nintendo's sales roundups. But nevertheless, Nintendo frequently brings back franchises with a remake first, and then lets the developers try their hand at creating something new. Even if the first Another Code did not set the world on fire, they may see a lot of potential to try something experimental with a new title, which would also, into the bargain, boost sales of Recollection, especially online sales where they get a bigger cut, as the game will likely be harder to find by then. Judging by when it was rated, Another Code was ready in early 2023, which means that it's possible that they moved on to developing a new one for release as early as perhaps 2026. Still, I think Nintendo are most likely to leave a gap of bare minimum 3 years. A different option then would be to resurrect another King franchise, such as Hotel Dusk, and this time I think it will be a good opportunity to use mouse functionality to replace the old DS's touchscreen, although I'm absolutely sure that as and when the new console has its Switch Lite version, the touchscreen would also be utilizable in order to play the game. I can even see why they might have chosen to resurrect Another Code on the Switch 1 and Hotel Dusk on the successor, given that Ashley from Another Code is more fitting for the younger audience that will increasingly be the primary owners of Switch 1s, whereas Hotel Dusk's slightly more adult and more masculine aesthetic is likely to have more appeal to the kind of early tech adopters likely to pick up that system in its early days, which will probably include a higher proportion of adult males. Therefore, I'd say there's about even chances of another King series by the end of 2028 making a comeback, whether that be a new Another Code or a remade Hotel Dusk. Out of the two, I think Hotel Dusk is perhaps more likely, especially since the presence of 2 different prior titles would make a Hotel Dusk Recollection package an obvious match for Another Codes, and probably less expensive to develop. Of course, the Famicom Detective Club series is another adventure series which has also become much more high-profile recently as a result of Emir the Smiling Man. Yoshio Sakamoto is turning 66 this year, and clearly his partnership with Kaori Miyachi on that game was intended to set up future Famicom Detective Club titles. His interview with Nintendo's site practically confirmed as much. But the man is a born storyteller, and he may well feel that he could give ideas to a new title. And even if he doesn't, Miyachi has a long experience of using different types of controllers. She was a supervisor on Active Health with Kel Vorderman and Art Academy. While Nintendo gives their developers, and especially it seems Sakamoto-san, a good deal of latitude, I imagine there will be a soft expectation for the developers to at least try to incorporate the mouse features. And after all, with a franchise like Famicom Detective Club, why not? Dialing telephone numbers, surveying locations for clues, and so on would be far simpler using a cursor. And of course, mages have developed with Nintendo for several years now, and it would not be astonishing if, like Grezzo and Tantalus before them, they graduated from one Nintendo series under their charge to two. After all, the company handles multiple adventure game franchises and visual novels, and as I've mentioned before, Nintendo does have other past franchises that could be resurrected, such as Satoru Shibata's favourite game, Shin Onigashima. One adventure series I don't expect to see back soon, but which could well benefit, is Detective Pikachu. Given how long the first Detective Pikachu sequel took, I think the Switch 2 will be old and grey before we get another one. But of course, as with any game of this sort, cursor functionality would make sense. Flipping then to a different genre, Nintendo might be able to bring back one or two other classic franchises, namely Art Academy and/or Mario Paint. Mario Paint, of course, included the first Super NES mouse, but I think these days a stylus would be preferable for most people's artistic endeavours compared to a big clunky mouse. In this sense, a capability would already be there on the existing Switch's touchscreen without the need for a mouse, although of course playing in docked mode, a mouse might be a nice compromise. Still, a mouse can be useful for navigating menus. I don't know I would expect a title like this to be showcased for the Switch 2, but it feels plausible, though still unlikely by the end of 2027, that Nintendo would return to some kind of art game, a genre after all they have experimented with multiple times in the past, but have left fallow on the Nintendo Switch so far. Then again, the idea of creating another Mario Paint for Wii U led to the development of the first Super Mario Maker. Raw numbers would suggest that if EPD10, the developers of the 2D Mario series, are going to be doing anything next, it should be another 2D Super Mario Bros. Game. Those games sell incredibly well, and the Switch benefited from having new Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe relatively early, freeing up the team to spend time on Super Mario Maker 2. However, if we assume that Nintendo will use Mario's 40th anniversary to reinvent a previous 2D Mario game, whether a remake or remaster of a title like the Wii New Super Mario Bros. Or a Sonic Origins-style Ultimate Collection of the classic Mario titles, or even a Super Mario Bros. Plus Bowser's Flower-induced fantasy type game, it would free up EPD10 to do something different. Indeed, it could easily be a launch window title if they had a 2-year turnaround time after finishing up Wonder, which isn't unprecedented. And if they're doing something different, surely the game that would make sense would be Super Mario Maker 3, or even perhaps Super Mario Maker 3D. I feel like Super Mario Maker 2 didn't quite jazz Nintendo as much as they hoped in terms of its success, but if they were to include a 3D design mode this time, a cursor mode could be especially useful. There's a lot of Mario coming down the chute, I'm sure, in the next few years, with a new 3D game and Mario Kart almost certain, but I think the odds of a Mario Maker or a game with similar influences just went up if we take on face value the apparent inclusion of some kind of cursor functionality. Now, it's still quite low, but not impossible that we will see such a title by the end of 2027. Before we move away from makers, we should mention, of course, Game Builder Garage. The title was originally a utilization of features for Nintendo Labo, and while I don't know how successful it was, incorporating mouse controls might be a good excuse to re-release what I'm sure would be a fairly iterative repackaging of an existing game, but which might give it extra life, especially since it's aimed primarily at younger players who, of course, would age out And so a Switch 2 version in a few years might be well positioned to appeal to a new generation. Of course, if there's a title that really feels like it would benefit from precise controls, it is Nintendogs, if only so you can pet your dog without looking like you're jabbing at it from afar. And here's an idea for you. What if Nintendo didn't just have the dog on screen, but actually sold soft toys to go with it, so you could actually pet the dog and have the sensors interact with the toy to figure out where you're petting on the screen so that your on-screen pet responds accordingly. Selling soft dog toys would be completely in Nintendo's wheelhouse, and especially in Japan where cute sells, but many Japanese apartments just don't have the space for pets, and I can imagine this being quite an exciting proposition. The Nintendogs phone patent and the return of Nintendogs Music in the very first tranche of Nintendo Music offerings show that the franchise, which let's remember has been a console launch title before, is not too far from Nintendo's minds. It's also a previous project of EPD9, the Mario Kart team, who often have a second title alongside Mario Kart for early in new systems, Nintendogs and Cats in 2011 and ARMS in 2017. That said, given the way Nintendo has rejigged its departments in recent years, I suspect it is more likely that EPD4 will now be calling walkies, but either way, I think a new Nintendogs by the end of 2028, if not before, does feel likely. Then we get into the wild and wacky world of party titles. Mario Party, Clubhouse Games, WarioWare, Brain Age, Big Brain Academy, all of these are great chances for Nintendo to utilise their weird and wacky controller functions as they are quite low risk. The whole game isn't designed around some novel idea, so they know that they can utilise the features to make the game stand out as distinctive without making anybody worry unduly. I also think there is huge potential, especially if the camera is more than just a traditional IR camera, but can, for example, detect colours. I could imagine it asking you to scan the room and then giving you challenges to find something of a particular colour, for example. And then we need to consider the standard flagship games where Nintendo might build in mouse control simply because they always try to utilise the newer features of their consoles on their core games, even ill-advisedly, such as the ball-rolling shrines in Breath of the Wild. I think the next 3D Zelda, 3D Mario, Splatoon and Metroid Prime all have a good chance of utilising a mouse control feature if such a feature exists when those games arrive. Metroid Prime might be a good one because it would make shooting more easy to achieve, but in the case of Zelda and Mario, I suspect they will be used to deliver innovative gameplay experiences. In the case of Zelda, I can imagine it being particularly useful, in fact. The recent Zelda games have been pushing more and more down the route of being tactile and giving the players huge control over the world around. I am loving Xenoblade Chronicles 3, but with both that and Tears of the Kingdom being heavily developed by Monolith Soft, it makes the comparison between a world which is a beautifully skinned set of polygons compared to Zelda's far more interactive, manipulable world all the more obvious. And that's not a dig on Xenoblade, it's a very different kind of game. But I think Nintendo wants Zelda to be different, and so I would expect a cursor functionality to allow even more freedom to permit activities which require fine motor controls in the new title. Also, titles like Phantom Hourglass would suddenly be playable on screen without a stylus, as a mouse would do a similar role, and a little more cleanly than pointing the Joy-Con at the screen. One final title that might use cursor controls though, specifically Star Fox. Rumours have been afoot for a new version of Star Fox Adventures, but in any event, Star Fox has been stuck in a black hole for a long time. But McCloud and company have often in the past been used to showcase new Nintendo technology, frequently launching near the start of previous systems. There's no doubt that a new Star Fox would look visually incredible, and in that case, it would be a good one to put at the beginning of the Switch 2's life. But is there a way that it could also offer Nintendo something more than just being a pretty face? Well, I'm not sure whether using a mouse would be vastly preferable to the more immersive gyro controls, but I think for many people it might. Gyro is great for something like shooting arrows in Breath of the Wild, where you need time to line up your shots precisely, but in a frenetic shooter like Star Fox, a mouse offers a better combination of speed and accuracy. I'm sure Nintendo would like to resurrect Star Fox. It's not just a favourite of Miyamoto, but it also is exactly the kind of IP with cute, iconic characters that is a potential goldmine if they can monetize it correctly. Look at the amount of time and effort they've put into making Metroid Prime 4 and marketing Pikmin 4, both franchises which have in the past underperformed. I think there's a strong chance that they will want to do the same sooner or later with Star Fox as well, but this would give them a second reason to try it out. They can use the title as a showcase for a new control mechanism, proving that the Switch 2 is capable of giving different experiences from other consoles on the market, and also easing people into the idea of using cursor control for playing console games. If the system does have a cursor functionality, I think a new Star Fox by the end of 2026 shoots into the fairly likely category. But I am sure that I've missed some Nintendo franchises in this list. Is Mole Mania going to become Mouse Mania? Will Ring Fit Adventure become Pinky Click Adventure? Like, share, comment, subscribe, check out the Patreon, and do have an amazing day before I see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.